right, everybody, welcome back. This is the end of the world with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
I'm Stu, and today we are talking about one of our very favorite movies, one of the movies that inspired us to start the podcast. That is Alfonso Cuarón's 2006 picture, Children of Men.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into all that, I just wanted to remind everyone to follow the podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at the end of the world WMS. You could write a review of the podcast if you're a fan. All that would be really helpful, as we're always trying to get more listeners, get the podcast into more sets of ears out there in the wide world. We have a bunch of regular repeat listeners, which is great, but the more the merrier, as they
Yes.
say. So it's been a little bit of a slower news week, given the
Yeah.
momentous
It's been
pace of history that we've been
right. I suppose it was
traveling on.
inevitable, right? Such a high bar was set over the last month or so, but yeah, it feels like it's now turning more into something approaching a regular campaign, right? Harris is sort of in. We're starting to see some, I guess, messaging development, right, on the side of the Democrats in particular.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you noticed
Well, I
this
feel like we
tactic?
talked last week a little bit about how the Republicans have been kind of wrong footed by the whole Harris switch out. And
Yeah,
the main attack line that the Dems have taken has been to just call the Republicans weird over and over again.
yeah. How do you feel about this?
I'm of two minds, like a tree in which there are two blackbirds. Which is to say, on the one hand, I think it's manifestly true that
Yeah,
most people don't actually like think about like natalism and like
sure.
like how essential it is for us to have as many kids as possible and stuff like this. It all feels a little alien and weird.
Yeah,
Um, on the other hand, it's the old beating a dead horse problem where I just feel like they're going to overdo it, and it's already getting
yeah. I
ground
think
into yeah.
I think that it's I wouldn't even go so far as to say it can't be effective, and I think there's a couple reasons for that. But I've I've already gone through the experience of like seeing some of it online and at first being like, oh, okay, that's there were a couple funny moments. I mean, obviously there was like the JD Vance couch situation where the sort of meme that he fucked a couch sort of like felt like it was the perfect intro to this idea,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it was never mind that it was completely not true, but
No, but that doesn't matter. I
no,
mean, the point is that like it sticks,
print
right?
the
That it
legend,
works with the
right?
character, right,
Yeah.
right. And so I think it makes sense to get a few laughs to bring a bit of sort of levity to what's been going on. I think is helpful too, and also um, the other side of the experience, which is like already I also am experiencing like the sort of like a cringe factor too, right? With like this weird terminology. It feels very close to something that like I don't want to say this, but that Hillary Clinton might sign off on.
Yeah, I think it's a little better than that. It feels a little bit more organic. It feels a little less top down. It feels a little less like Hillary Clinton and Bill doing the Sopranos ending to
Yeah,
like
maybe.
announce
I
the
guess
campaign song or whatever.
what I'm saying is that, and to be fair, I don't have a better idea particularly, but it seems to be of the mind of like convincing or being convinced of America and Americans' ultimate reasonableness, right? So
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
which was a tactic that was definitely employed in the Clinton run, right? This idea that at the end of the day, this is a bridge too far, whereas we've just seen the bridge sort of be traversed across constantly over the last 8 years. But then the other thing that I find interesting about it, which may be sort of a sad commentary, but not to particularly say it's not effective, is that it feels as though for some people, and maybe enough people, um, they don't want to look the politics of it in the face, right? I mean, we talk about this a lot, that like Americans have a tendency, and people in the West tend to have when it comes to something like climate change or any sort of possible solution to the sort of greater problems that this stage of capitalism creates, that it's very difficult to look right at the problem. And
Sure.
so something with Project 2025, which is obviously an incredibly frightening and evil set of proposals. That, perhaps the state of disrepair of our overall body politic makes it easier for people to address some of these things through the lexicon of weirdness and creepiness,
Yeah, I think
as
creepy
opposed to
it's creepy for me is preferable to weird because I don't want to cede ground on weirdness. You know, when I think of weird, I
for
think of
sure.
the infamous "Keep Austin Weird" campaign,
Right,
right?
right, right.
Or the Weird Sisters from Macbeth,
Yes,
those
yes, yes,
powerful
yes.
witches with their prophecy and foretelling. Whereas I think weirdness is fine, but creepiness, which is I think actually what's more emblematic of the Republican
Yeah,
platform, right? That's something that also suggests some of their more unsavory ties to various
right. I just
abusive
wonder.
figures such as Donald Trump, but
I
also,
just wonder
you
if,
know,
like, again, this isn't a great testament to the political discourse, but that maybe this is just a slightly more digestible way
yeah,
of
yeah, I think that's right.
messaging.
Yeah, and you know, it seems to be working pretty well. Is it sustainable for the next 100 days or however
Right.
long we have
We'll
to the
see.
election? Probably not, but
Yeah.
you know, God bless. I hope that it works well enough that Trump isn't reelected. Things, even if Harris is elected, are you know, there's no panacea here, and I think that
No.
one of the
Right.
things we've been talking about a lot is this messianism that's very much in vogue in American politics, and you worry that you know you certainly saw that with the like never you know the Biden do like hardliners like Biden forever people this idea that like Biden is this remarkably good and like change
Right.
agent, right? Where I just find this line of thinking to be naive and
Yep.
ridiculous. And the idea that Harris is going to somehow be, I mean, we got burned with Obama, right? You believed in hope and
Mhm.
change, and you got nothing. You know, you got drones and ultimately Trump, right? So how did
Right.
that work out for us? But you know, speaking of stagnating cultures and
Sure.
a stagnating reality, that is certainly one of the main themes of our film this week, Children of Men, a film that I've seen probably 5 or 6 times at this point,
Yeah, I
and
think I've seen it a few
that I
times.
always catch a few things slightly differently. This time I was very focused on the soundtrack. A lot of
Oh, really?
yeah, a
Okay.
lot of like nostalgic John Lennon, Rolling Stones, but also like alternate versions of songs. So like
Yeah.
the
Yeah, yeah.
original version of Ruby Tuesday
Ruby Tuesday.
plays at the
Right.
beginning, but then a cover of Ruby Tuesday, and then Free to People, that John Lennon Plastic Ono Band song, gets played at some
Yeah.
point, and then it plays over the final credits too. But it's an alternate take, uh, as if like all that's left for us is to mine the depths of the past. Like there's nothing new, but you
Right.
know maybe we can find an alternate version of something old, you know, which I think kind of fits in with some of the themes of the film. The film is based on a novel from 1992 by P.D. James, who is a famous female detective novelist
Hmm.
of the British variety. Have you ever read any P.D. James?
No.
Yeah, it's not
Although
big.
I feel like I've seen like 10 shows based on PD James's work.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a rich vein of television culture, right?
Right,
The
right.
detective miniseries or the
Especially the Brits love that shit. And the Scandinavians. The
yeah,
Brits love this.
that's true. I love the all the British shows that are like in Oxfordshire, and there's like enough murders you know there's like 10 series of 8 episodes each,
Yeah,
and it's like oh so
right.
there's like 80 murders like in this tiny hamlet these two like detectives have to solve over and over. Sort of the Murder She Wrote thing,
Right,
right?
but they're only ever like going case by case. No one's ever addressing these obviously very serious root causes
Yeah,
of
like what is
violence
the
in this tiny
systemic
town.
reason that this like otherwise beautiful hamlet is just
Yeah.
overrun with killers? Yeah. Um, so I haven't read the original novel. I read a brief summary of it last night, and it seems very different. right? Basically, that novel focuses more on the high politics of like the people who are ruling this kind of
Mhm.
post-apocalyptic Britain. And I think the film very wisely veers away from that completely and just sort of uses as its basis the premise, which is that the movie's set in 2027, and for 18 years there have been no children born anywhere on Earth.
Man,
Right?
JD Vance would have hated this.
Yeah, this is like
This is his worst
this is
nightmare.
actually this is the one thing they didn't want to have happen. Um, and we've one of the first little one of the things I like about the movie, and we've discussed this before in reference to other films, is a lot of the exposition is done diegetically, which is to say, characters in the film are listening to the radio or passing
Yeah.
by a television, and
Or there's signage.
right, and we learn stuff about the world through that as opposed to a character, stopping and being like, "What do you mean, Pierce? Like, don't you remember? Since
Yeah.
2009, don't you?" Just like, which always
Yeah, it does a
feels
good job of making sure it's like it's a story about people. I mean, obviously there's a heroic tale too, but
yeah,
it's essentially a story of people living through the thing, right?
exactly. And it's an apocalyptic world that's been ongoing, right? That
Yeah.
this thing has happened. There's no explanation in the movie given. Um, there's this there's a reference to a flu pandemic that occurred about a year before the infertility crisis started. Maybe there's some linkage,
Mhm.
pandemics have been known to cause fertility
And this is
issues.
like very, very near future, right? It's set in
Well, it's
2027.
very near
So,
future for us now. The movie came out in
right, but
in
even then, I
2006.
mean,
It's 20 years in the future from when it came out.
right. But no one had been born sort of right away. This had been going on for 18 years, isn't that right? Like the
2009 is when no one's been born since then. Yeah.
right. The movie starts with the youngest person alive
Baby
dying,
Diego.
being killed. Yeah, baby Diego.
He gets murdered by a fan. He like refuses to sign an autograph for a fan and spits on them, so he's murdered.
Yeah, it's a great opening because the Clive Owen character Theo, he just wants a coffee,
Yeah.
right? Everyone else is like looking up at this thing, and he's just trying to get
Everyone is
his
just like
morning
their
cup.
tears in the corner of their eyes about this
Yeah,
poor baby Diego. And then immediately after getting his coffee, the place where he was ordering from explodes because
yeah,
there's been a terrorist attack. So we're very quickly. I mean, another thing that's great about this is it's just so grimy, right?
yeah,
This is a post-apocalyptic world that just looks. It's like a Mad Max level, but just in London, and there's still
right.
like people living there, right? As opposed to just in the Australian outback or whatever,
Sure.
right? Um, yeah. So Theo is the main character, and he has been beaten down by reality. As at the opening, he seems to have very little desire to live. As you say, he doesn't even
Mhm.
care about baby Diego. However, he does use the death of baby Diego to get out of work early. He's like, "Excuse me, sir. The death of baby Diego seems to have upset me more than I realized.
Yeah,
Might I complete my day's tasks from home?" And the boss is like, "Sure, whatever." And at this point, he goes off to his one sort of retreat from this bleak world, which is his friend
Mhm.
Jasper, who lives with his wife in a sort of secluded area near Canterbury, and he's a he's a pot dealer, right? His
Yeah.
wife
It's
is
Michael Caine. Michael Caine, by the way.
oh yeah, a somewhat well known actor, and his wife is mute and is in a wheelchair because presumably she was tortured by some fascist
Mhm.
agents. They were all previously activists, but at this point, activism of a normal type is impossible. The only people doing activism are the terrorists, like the ones who perhaps set off the bomb. We don't ever really know. It doesn't really
Yeah.
matter. And this is where we hear the Ruby Tuesday, uh, who could hang a name on you, etc. A kind of cloying Rolling Stones song, sort of maudlin, one of their kind of Mick Jagger like maudlin numbers. It's a
Right.
little schmaltzy even. Uh, not my favorite song, shall we say? And all the music throughout the film we hear is ancient, as if creation itself
Yeah.
has sort of ceased. That there's no future. So for that reason, there are literally no more young people, right?
Yeah, and
So
it kind of like it kind of hints at like the what developed into the full on like reboot culture that we have now, right? The use of these cover songs.
yeah,
Yeah,
just
the idea that like
endlessly
nothing
recycling.
valuable can be created, so we're in like a process of perpetual
Yeah,
sort of
and just like
recreation.
relaunching old franchises.
Right.
The
Well, it makes
audience,
sense, right? It's sort of like remember when it was good, right? Is like what people have listening to that type of
yeah, it's like
music,
remember
which
when life was good when we had He-Man? Remember we had real art like the GI Joe cartoon, Barbie, right? I mean, it's not it'd be one thing if it was like, hey, remember Picasso or like
right.
remember Van Gogh? No, it's like um on his way home from spending the night smoking pot with his friend Jasper, he is kidnapped. Someone puts a bag over his head, and it turns out who has kidnapped him but his estranged wife, Julian, played by Julianne Moore. And we come to learn eventually that they were married, they were activists in the time before the infertility struck, presumably in the years building up to this kind of fascist overhaul of British society. And
Right.
she seems to be American. This isn't addressed. It's fine, whatever. But and they had a child, right? And the child died of this flu pandemic. We don't learn these
Mhm.
details until later, but the reason they split up is that they reacted very differently to the death of this child. And on the one hand, Theo kind of retreated from activism, took a very straight laced job in the civil service, whereas Julian was
Yeah.
radicalized and formed
Right.
this.
In her mind, like he sort of gave up, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
in his mind, she was sort of fighting a pointless battle.
Yeah, which I think, that you see this happen sometimes when families lose a child, either to an accident or disease or murder or something
Mhm.
horrible. Sometimes it just, you can't stand to be with the person anymore, so you
Yeah.
kind of move on. Um, they need Julian because she's part of this group called the Fishes, which is I think great because what's the plural of fish again? It's
Fish.
fish, but the group is called the Fishes.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
Made me think. I thought about
Right.
this the other day because it's like Luca Brasi sleeps with the fishes, right? And
Right.
it's like part of the that's just so iconic that you don't even think about it. But part of what's so funny about it is that it's wrong, right? That like
Right.
he sleeps with the fish. He doesn't sleep with the fishes. But
Yeah, and there is like a touch of humor that sort of pervades the whole movie, right? Nothing. It's like extremely dark, but I found myself chuckling
yeah,
at
I mean,
moments in the
I think the Michael
conversation.
Caine character Jasper is very funny,
Yeah.
and even Clive Owen's character Theo has these like sardonic moments,
Right.
which we can discuss in a little bit. But basically, they need Theo to get them a pass. Someone in their group needs to travel to the coast. The only way to do this is with the proper permissions. These permissions can only be granted by people in positions of power. And it just turns out that Theo's cousin, Nigel, is good to see that name is still going. That Nigel is a bigwig. He
Yeah.
is powerful. He's rich.
A member of the elite,
Of the
let's say.
elite sort of sect of people, the 0.1% who actually
Yeah.
are like behind the scenes running. And he runs something called the Arc of the Arts. And this is like one of the aspects of the movie that I think has been most commented upon.
Hmm.
Uh, because basically, as society has collapsed in the wake of the no more children phenomenon, people have gone about, people like Nigel, and they've gathered valuable works of art, and they're just kind of hoarding them in the Battersea Power Station, which is the very famous landmark on the Thames, where the Pink Floyd album "Animals" was the cover of that album with the pig floating in the
Right.
air. Is that building? And in fact, that Pink Floyd pig is one of the valuable objects that they have
Right.
floating. It's kind of dingy, but it's out there floating.
Yeah, they're just kind of there, like the David of Michelangelo's there, but
but
a
it's
dog's just hanging out in front of it.
but it also has like part of its leg has been blown off, so there's like
Yeah,
a girder like holding it up. Picasso's Guernica, famous anti-war painting inspired by
hmm
the bombing in the Spanish Civil War, and even a Banksy is there. So that's how you know
sure, why not?
this place
I
is really
mean,
serious.
got to have some Brit content in there with the Pink Floyd, right?
Yeah, so Theo visits his cousin to try and get these passes. He claims he has a girlfriend who's never seen the ocean. He wants to take her. Or no, he says she has a sick brother who's going to die. They need to go
hmm
visit him. Whatever. Nigel is kind of annoyed. He seems like a testy asshole. Weird.
Yeah,
But he eventually agrees. And as they're wandering around this kind of like museum, you come to realize it's really more of a mausoleum. Because as Theo says, like, in 100 years' time, there's not going to be anyone to look at any of this stuff. So, like, what's the point of even collecting it? And Nigel responds that he just tries not to think about that. Look, I'm just going to get stuff. And this is kind of like the he's the figure of like the rich acquisitive consumer, the person who just gathers things to gather them mindlessly. It's
yeah, and
like,
it's
oh,
really the only representation of that class in the movie, right? All the other power people are, anti-immigrant officers and cops and military types, right?
yeah. And this is one of the things that like Mark Fisher, the late great
hmm
British literary philosophical critic, kind of like fixates on, because like he claims that this dystopia is specific to late capitalism. He says this isn't the familiar, and this is from his book Capitalist Realism. This isn't the familiar totalitarian scenario routinely trotted out in cinematic dystopias. See, for example, James McTeague's 2005 V for Vendetta. In the P.D. James novel on which the film is based, democracy is suspended and the country is ruled over by a self appointed warden. But wisely, the film downplays all of this. For all that we know, the authoritarian measures that are everywhere in place could have been implemented within a political structure that remains nominally democratic, right? The war on terror has prepared us for such a development. The normalization of crisis produces situations in which the repealing of measures brought to deal with emergency becomes unimaginable. When will the war be over? So his point is basically like, there doesn't have to be like a Nazi takeover for these kind of fascistical
Right.
policies. And we've seen this just in recent vintage with Biden adopting all of the Republicans' border policies
hmm
and just being like, oh, I've unilaterally
Yeah, I mean, it
limited
sort of
immigrant.
speaks.
And it's like, there's
It
no
speaks.
going back.
It speaks a bit to what we've talked about on occasion on the podcast, right? That it's sort of it's an extrapolation of the era of like managing the collapse that already is, right? And like
Yeah,
any type of administrative effort therein is based around the fact that like the crisis has been normalized.
exactly. That's really well said. Just one more thing from Fisher. He says, the catastrophe in Children of Men is neither waiting down the road nor has it already happened. Rather, it is being lived through. There's no
Yeah.
punctual moment of disaster. The world doesn't end with a bang. It winks out, unravels, gradually falls apart. What caused the catastrophe to occur? Who knows? Its causes lie long in the past, so absolutely detached from the present as to seem like the caprice of a malign being, a negative miracle, a malediction with no penitence, which no penitence can ameliorate. Really good, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, again, there's nothing that can be done about this. The causes are unknown and unknowable in a sense because they're so long in the past. And for him, this is like the state of play under neoliberalism, right?
Yeah.
That austerity programs brought about by neoliberalism gradually slip us closer and closer to this kind of dystopian world where the means of support necessary for the creation and generation of real artwork or real innovation and thinking is no longer available to anyone. And all that's available is the kind of mindless, bureaucratic existence that Theo has subjected himself to, or the mindless acquisitiveness, which is to say, just getting as much stuff as you can for the rich, right? There's no thought of
Right.
anyone being like a creative like spark in this reality.
Right. And it's also it's interesting to note that again, we don't have firm evidence as to how and why the fertility crisis began and continues. It sort of suggests in an almost literary way that while possibility of politics and change and creation are being sort of destroyed, it then makes sense that the very act of creation of life also falls by the wayside, right?
Exactly. Um, so Theo's resistant to help, but he gets this pass. But the downside for him is that it's a two-person pass, so he has to travel
Mhm.
with whoever this person they need to go. So he's got like roped in deeper. All the while, Theo's like gouging them. He's like, yeah, another 5,000 pounds for
Yeah.
that, and right. So he's like, it's good because he doesn't start this film from a particularly moral. We don't
No.
we don't think we're like Theo's just he's being opportunistic. His ex-wife has approached him. They haven't talked in years. Now she's a terrorist. Where
Right. It's interesting because it sort of is in keeping with the whole movie that Theo doesn't really occupy the space of a hero or the space of a villain or the space of an anti-hero. He's just some sort of
he's an everyman. He's
weird.
an everyman,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
that's right.
And we can all imagine ourselves existing as he does in this film.
Yeah.
It's not a he's not a sort of Superman of some kind, right?
Hmm.
Um, there's this great sequence where he goes to give the passes to them. He meets Luke, who's Julian's assistant, uh, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, who was also in 2012, by the way.
Right, right.
He played the scientist, and there's a midwife, Miriam, and then Key, who is this young um, black woman who is a refugee. She's someone who does not
Hmm.
have legal status to be in the United Kingdom. And there are a lot of these people, and as we come to see, a lot of them are being rounded up and interned theoretically to be deported, but I get the sense that there isn't actually a lot of deportation or deporting actually happening.
No. In fact, like the anti-immigrant storyline is basically it seems like it's the last remaining outwardly political issue, right?
Yeah,
It's not that it's even really being fought, right? Except through these various terrorist organizations. Um, but it is you're constantly being like informed about it. You see signage that's like jobs for British people only.
right.
Um, Everything is designed to like make sure
If you
that you
see
know
an
that,
illegal immigrant, report them.
right,
Even
report
if
it.
they're
Yeah,
your
yeah.
best friend, even if they're
Right.
your
We've
your
it's
maid or
one
whatever.
it's one step from if you see something, say something. On the
Yeah,
subway instead, it's like if you see an illegal
which
immigrant,
again
please
alludes
report
to
them to
sort of
the
yeah, no, like Fisher's connection with like the war on terror, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
um, so they're in a car, they're going to a safe house. There's this very touching thing. This reminded me so much of Civil War, and I'm surprised I didn't put this together when we saw Civil War. Remember in Civil War when they're like doing the car switching scene,
Yeah. Yep.
where they meet the other journalist and like the young journalist jumps
They're
into
kind of
the.
having fun
They're having
briefly.
fun, and then instinctively. I mean, I've seen this movie a lot, so maybe I didn't know the first time, but you're
Mhm.
shocked because seconds later they're passing this like ping pong ball. They're shooting it to each other's mouths, and you're
Yeah,
like,
it's the only
oh,
romantic moment of the
oh, they
movie,
still have
basically.
like this connection from when they were married, and then just
Yeah.
instantly this burning car comes out of the woods. A gang of people on foot appear. Julianne Moore's character is shot and killed, just like
Yeah.
very suddenly. You're like, wait, she's the star of the movie. You can't do that. It's the old.
Right. And all of the sort of the idea that you would have in watching this movie, right? That Julian and Theo would rekindle their romance and perhaps end up together, come to some understanding, and be
Which
like a
is
ray
what
of
does
hope
have.
for the movie.
Which is what happens
They
in the
what
book.
I'm saying
Actually,
is they in the movie they like pack it into this one sequence. I think Julianne Moore is fantastic in this role, but it comes together where they have their argument, then they have their kind of sweet moment. They kind of suggest that there's still like a physical connection, and Julian even says like, when Theo's like, well, what happens after all of this between us? And she even says like, well, I don't know. You know, like it really does, it moves in that direction where you're like, oh, okay, so this is going to be a thing where, yeah, there's a lot of bad in the world, but there's this
There's
possibility
this
of
spark of hope.
love.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And then immediately
Extinguished.
just kill it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember, I don't know what it was like for you. I remember the first time
Oh yeah.
being shocked. I mean, even just
Utterly
from the basic
shocked.
sense of like seeing someone of Julianne Moore's stature have the role, that I'm just assuming for sure she's in the whole movie. You know, I and so like to see her just
But she's like
removed,
top
you know.
billed. It's like
Yeah, yeah.
it's like Clive Owen,
it's
Julianne Moore, and she's only
and
in
it's
the
sort of like
first.
the moment when I watched it the first time, and in a different way the second time. It's the moment where I thought, well, this could be a great movie actually. This
Yeah.
is this is a little bit different here.
Yeah, exactly. They managed to get away. Luke, the assistant, murders a couple of cops who come along. They're like, "Oh, we're British citizens. We're British." They're like, "All right, we'll check out what's happening." And as they turn their backs, he just shoots them.
Yeah.
They get to the safe house, and it's revealed that Key, the young, presumably African woman, we don't know where she's from originally, but that's sort of the implication. She is pregnant,
Yeah.
and she's almost there. She's like she's
Yeah,
fully
they've
pregnant.
left it late. They've left
She
it
is
late.
to term almost, right? I think she's
Yeah.
8 months and some weeks,
Yeah.
right? And everyone is, Theo just doesn't know what to do. He's just like, and throughout the film, when either her pregnancy or her child, who is born in a couple days after this, is shown, the reactions of all the characters are great because this is like a baby is something no one has seen for almost, you know, 15, 16 years, whatever the last toddlers, like
Yeah.
there have been just no babies anywhere in the world. Um, and it's possibility, right? We had
Right.
the hope of love, but that's now over. Julian's dead, but it's replaced with the possibility of actual redemption and salvation for the human race.
Right.
Because presumably, if some people can have, she's probably not the only person who can have.
Yeah, and they do. It's the pregnancy reveal is also really interesting in the way that they like, again, they keep it sort of grounded in the world where she announces to Theo that she's a virgin.
Well, Theo's like, "Who's the father?" She's like,
Yeah,
She's
yeah.
like, "I'm a virgin." Theo's like,
Yeah,
"What?"
and briefly
She's like,
you're watching
"No."
and you're like, oh yeah. You're like, wait, are they going that way with this in this like sci-fi world? And she's just like, no, I just don't know who these people's names were.
Yeah. That's really good because again, you're hedging. You're like, oh, is this going to be some weird Christian allegory? And
Yes,
it's like,
right,
well, on
right.
some level, yes, but on another level, no, not like
Yeah.
we're not going to go that far.
Right.
While they're at the safe house, Theo overhears Luke, the assistant, who they thought was on their side, chatting with one of the other fishes, and turns out it was a setup that they killed Julianne on purpose because they want to use the baby for their own ends. They don't want to help her
Yeah.
get away. Oh, we should also say her goal in this is to escape to this group called the Human Project, right?
Right. We don't quite know if they're real or
They're
mythical.
right. They feel fake, like,
Yeah.
and they live on the Azores, right out in the
Mhm.
Atlantic Ocean, and they're still good. Like they haven't succumbed to like the fascist
Right. Well, I will
tendencies.
say, I did live in the Azores
You
for
did
a year. Yeah,
for a
I
whole
lived
year
there. Yeah, in 2004 with like 10 of my friends.
in after
Um,
college, or
yeah, we had a band, classic story, and our friend had a beach house and a farmhouse in the Azores,
oh,
and we went and
terrible.
we recorded an album. And I will say, the people there are so fantastic that if I had to guess of a place that would still hold on
It would be the Azores.
to being fundamentally good and be able to house something like the Human Project, to be honest, it would probably be the Azores.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I knew about the band, but I didn't know that it was in the Azores. God,
Yeah, yeah, we moved there.
amazing. So the goal is to get Key to probably the farmhouse where you stayed. I'm sure that's their end goal.
To
Right?
hear the hot tracks coming out.
Yeah, they're
of
actually right. They enter, and your band is playing over the loudspeaker.
playing Ruby Tuesday.
Yeah, your cover, your famous cover.
Yeah.
So they get away from Luke. he's like, we got to go now. He sneaks off with the a midwife and with Key. Julian, before she died, told Key that Theo is the only one she should trust, which Theo's kind of flummoxed by because he's like, we broke up.
That is one of the things that I'm also a little flummoxed by. I can't quite do the math where she's built herself up to lead this organization, and she has this man that she hasn't talked to in 20 years, right?
Not quite 20, but a long time, right?
It's as though, like, what are we supposed to take, that she knew that she was under threat by the very people she was working
She
with?
probably
maybe?
suspected that, and she also she believes that under his veneer of cynicism and hopelessness, Theo is still at heart a good person, that she was an actress.
Right. I guess it's just a little strange that there's no trust in any of the people.
Well, turns out she was right to not trust
them. She was right.
they murdered her.
It's a bit of a leap, because it's like, if that's true, then why didn't she just meet Theo with Key, or in the first place, alone, and get this party started?
All right. All right. Fair. Okay. Minor nitpick. So, according to you, this film is garbage. It's terrible. The film is canceled. Even would you say that?
Right.
They get away, but they go to Jasper, right? Which the one person, the Michael Caine, he is.
But also, can we just talk briefly about how they get away? Because again, this sort of plays into one of the things I really love about the movie.
Oh, it's so good.
You've got, again, this sort of negative miracle sci-fi world that Fisher talks about, right? Where you're so outside of radical technological advancements. They're still on shitty double-decker buses. The cars still look as they would. And the car doesn't start, right? And so
they have to get it moving so the engine will turn over.
Right.
So he's pushing the car.
He's literally pushing the car to get it going.
Yeah.
And it speaks to, I think it gives a bit of context for the whole process. Like, for example, in this moment at the safe house, right? They are not found, but they are reported on the news. They know who killed these cops, and there was this incident and all of this, but you don't live in, even in the world of the authorities, you don't live in this spectacular sci-fi world where you would be instantly apprehended, right?
Right. There's no satellite footage of the
right. The fact that they can get away and they aren't, being tracked or have chips in their body, or, the drones are following them in the car. Like, none of that takes place. And I think that's sort of essential to building out the idea of what happened in this world, right?
Right. Whereas, like, some of the technological surveillance advances that we have had in the, pretty much same amount of time since then, just weren't realized in this world, because why bother? Right? I mean, I'm sure there aren't, like, tech startups, like, we're going to, right? Like, because as with the creativity, like, any kind of innovation is stymied by the fact that there's a diminishing audience for everything.
Yeah.
Because as people die, they are not being replaced. During the night they stay at Jasper's, we learn a little bit more, some of which I already explained, about their son, Julian, and Theo's son, Dylan, who died in the flu pandemic. And as Jasper says, Theo's faith lost out to chance, right? That Theo was this committed activist, and then this chance death, the fact that his son by chance caught this flu and died, that destroyed him. And that's not, it could just as easily have gone the other way, right? Like, there's like this sense of fate, but that fate is random, right?
It's sort of the idea of, like, history is not inevitable. No matter how well it can be explained or how many forces were at play.
The next morning, they're of course found by the fishes. How the fishes found them, unclear. They knew that Theo was there because they've been tailing him, I think, before they kidnapped him. Because remember, they kidnapped him on the way back from there.
Yep.
So Jasper euthanizes his mute wife and dog, puts on the cover version of Ruby Tuesday, and then attempts to misdirect their pursuit.
Yeah.
Tells Theo, you can meet my contact Sid, who's like a cop who can get them into this prison complex, this refugee center, where they'll be
Mhm.
on the shore, so they'll be able to get into a boat and rendezvous at the appointed time with the human project.
Right. No, it was
Um,
another great moment of the movie where Jasper's, literally putting his life on the line to stall to buy a bit of time. But Theo just stops the car and
to
watches
watch.
all of the stalling. He's trying to play jokes with the guy. He
He's
gets
like,
shot a
pull my
couple
finger,
times.
and they shoot off his
Yeah,
finger, and
yeah.
he's
And
like,
Theo, instead of just running away, which I'm sure Jasper was hoping was happening,
he's just
he
stopped.
just watches it. Yeah,
And then Theo goes back to the car, and Key is like, Jasper? And Theo's like, he's fine.
yeah,
Like, even though they've just heard shots, he's so obviously not fine.
yeah.
Um, so they're meeting Sid, but they're meeting him in a school, which is great because it's abandoned. It's like
Yeah.
another one of these, like, it's like they walk in, there's a deer that's living in the school apparently. Like,
Yeah, you don't get the sense that there's still like a school board,
no,
right?
no, no, yeah. The teachers have all been they've been made redundant, shall we say.
Yeah, yeah.
And uh they meet Sid. Sid is awful. He's like this, he talks about himself in the third person. He's
Hmm.
this border cop who Jasper sold weed to, so he's cool, but
Well, he's purely transactional. I mean,
oh yeah.
you get the sense that he's still an evil person,
He's
but he'll
completely
do
evil.
whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And as they get onto this bus to go into the camp, and you get to see this guard comes on the bus, right? And they're
Hmm.
trying to distract from the fact that Key is obviously pregnant.
Yeah.
And in order to do this, Miriam gets up and starts doing prayers and stuff and just gets whacked and taken away. And that's it for her. We never see
Hmm.
her again. Last sight of her is like she's getting a bag pulled over her head. It's
Right.
like
It's all over for Miriam.
goodbye, Miriam. Goodbye,
Yeah.
Ruby Tuesday. Um, the guard's behavior gives us the only glimpse we have into just how loathsome these people are, like how
Yeah.
hideous their behavior is. And it's like anti-immigrant sentiment now, but even more vicious and despicable.
Hmm.
You just see the like soft horror of like an empowered bigot who's
Yep.
just like, you people disgust me. So they get into the camp, they meet their contact. It's all been arranged in advance somehow. They get this utterly squalid room for the night where, miracle of miracles, she gives birth. It's a girl.
Right on Theo's jacket.
Yeah, on this utterly disgusting mattress. It's
Right. He's sterilizing his hands with his whiskey.
yeah. And
Right.
at first she says she wants to name the daughter Bazooka.
Yeah.
Earlier when she thought it was a boy, she wanted to name him Froley. So these are these nice little light moments, as you said. But when they wake up in the morning after the baby has been born, bad news. The fishes have raided the camp and are seeking out the baby. And it's just another, like the scene earlier with pushing the car. Like, this is a great movie. It's very thoughtful. The action sequences in it are also just incredible.
Yeah.
There is this
These long takes.
these
I mean, it's
long
just
tracking
fantastic.
shots of them moving through this war zone of this
Yeah.
camp. And it's unbelievable. There's that one sequence where blood gets splashed onto the camera lens.
Yeah.
So it's like a weird moment where you're like, oh, the fictionalness of it, but it also feels like a documentary kind of.
Right.
Like this would happen if a real war photographer
Yeah.
were
And the
in
shots also, like, through the whole movie, a lot of these shots make it also feel sort of like video game-esque.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're like every single thing that Theo has to do, whether it's starting the car, right?
Yeah,
Or getting the
yeah,
kid down the
yeah.
stairs.
A little bit like
The
Last of Us in that
Last
way.
of Us feel. Yeah, for sure.
Good call. There's this is like a dizzying exchange, right? Theo loses Key, the baby gets captured by Luke. Luke has Key and the baby. They go into this building. The army appears. They're shooting tanks at the building. It's all like, really amazing and insane. Theo has to run into this building while the tank is like reloading.
Yeah.
And eventually he has this weird last dialogue with Luke, who's like monologuing about how they're the ones who should have the baby as he's like firing a machine gun out the window.
But also saying like seeing a baby so beautiful
Yeah,
while
it's
shooting his
just
gun.
like this utterly disconnected kind of sequence of feelings existing
Yeah.
almost simultaneously. As they're escaping Luke, he shoots Theo. Right, Theo takes a bullet in the gut and keeps moving. They get away. Luke is blown up. Thank God. He was terrible. Um, and they leave as they're leaving the building. There's this scene where the kind of mood of holiness really takes over, where people see the baby, and both sides of this literal war, like guerrilla street warfare, pause to let them pass. And it's almost as if everyone has become entranced by this impossible, miraculous sight. And then as soon as they're out of like out of the way, the fighting resumes again.
The war continues. Right?
It's just like it's like there's this aura, and once the aura is passed, it's like, oh, we got to kill those guys, right?
Right. The shot slows down, the camera slows down,
the music
everyone's
kind of
looking longingly. Right. What might be able to happen? The world may just be able to overcome this, and then it's no.
Back to mayhem. Carnage resume. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they get to a rowboat that's down a grate. They get out. Key's like, we're not going to make it. We missed it. And Theo's like, no, this is like the exact right time. And she's like, oh my God, I'm bleeding. He's like, no, you're not. I'm bleeding. Right. And it's like, he dies as the boat from the Human Project, which is real, appears. The last thing he learns is he's like, keep her close, Key. And Key's like, I'm going to name the baby Dylan. It's also a girl's name. Dylan was the name of Theo's late son. So it all kind of ties together nicely. And the boat is called the Tomorrow. And you kind of, the last shot of the movie is you see these guys kind of like, oh, up there, you know? And
yeah, and you don't, it's up to you to choose sort of what happens next, right? I mean, either you can believe that the Tomorrow and the Human Project is the salvation for Key, but it's never explicitly known whether the Human Project is maybe associated in a negative way with the very people who Julian said not to trust. Julian's words to Key were to trust nobody. Does that include the Human Project? And does Key have any choice in the matter at this point?
Well, no, she doesn't.
Right.
But I think it's smart of the movie to just end here, though.
Yes.
You know, Theo's story, whom we've been following, has come to its conclusion. I think the entire movie is seen through his perspective, right? There's not one scene where he's not the focal character.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, the ending is sad. Theo dies, we assume. I mean, he seems dead, right? But he's accomplished his goal. He's renewed that which was lost. And
we hope, yeah.
Well, as best as he's able to, right?
Right, but what's interesting again about the ambiguity of the ending is sort of putting the onus on the viewer to have that exact sort of hope, right? You have to choose to believe that something good is going to happen now to Key and the baby.
Yeah. You have to imagine that it does, right? In a film that's kind of about the death of imagination. Right. Just to wrap up, I wanted to mention a couple more quotes from Fisher. Again, the book is Capitalist Realism. I'll put a link to the book where you can buy it in the show notes. He says, "Children of Men connects to the suspicion that the end has already come. The thought that it could well be the case that the future harbors only reiteration and repermutation, which we've talked about many times with franchises and the like. Could it be that there are no breaks, no shocks of the new to come? Such anxieties tend to result in a bipolar oscillation. The weak messianic hope that there must be something new on the way lapses into the morose conviction that nothing new can ever happen. The focus shifts from the next big thing to the last big thing. How long ago did it happen, and just how big was it? Tradition counts for nothing when it is no longer contested and modified. I thought this was really smart, right? That like he's thinking about the guy who's hoarding the famous artworks in the Battersea power station, right? A culture that is merely preserved is no culture at all. The fate of Picasso's Guernica in the film, once a howl of anguish and outrage against fascist atrocities, now a wall hanging, is exemplary. Like its Battersea hanging space in the film, the painting is accorded iconic status only when it is deprived of any possible function or context. No cultural object can retain its power when there are no longer new eyes to see it. And I think that point about the power station only becoming iconic once it is no longer a power station, right? It's it's like an emblem of like this old style of energy generation that we have abandoned, but the husk of it is now powerful and valuable in and of itself only as this kind of totem of what was before, right?
Yeah.
And so I mean, I get it. I think this is a great movie about the sort of decline of our society under austerity, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think you also see some of these different elements of both what Fisher is saying, obviously, and also the more literal interpretation of the fertility issue in the current climate, right? I mean, a culture that is merely preserved is no culture at all. I mean, sort of plays to like obviously both the sort of decline of the culture of whether it's liberal Hollywood or the MAGA Republicans, right? This like idea of going back or making America great again. And what that means is precisely no contesting or no modification of what was before. And then when it comes to the fertility issue, it kind of plays into what we talked about at the beginning, right? Which is one of the things that is happening and sort of being contested right now along the lines of this, like, it's weird to be in our bedrooms. It's weird to like lambaste women for not having children. And I think the people articulating that are correct, certainly, but it is interesting, to note the sort of impact in terms of politics, right? Because one of the arguments you can make is that, yes, there are a lot of people who choose not to have children, and obviously they shouldn't suffer in any way for that choice. There are also a lot of people in the working class, in particular, and in this country, even the middle class, who have literally been priced out of having children. And what would be interesting to see is that to be articulated at some point, that the likes of J.D. Vance, who have the more than enough resources to form their families and talk about how important they are and talk about how anyone who doesn't have one is somehow flawed or degenerate, that there are, thousands and thousands of Americans who I'm sure would love to have a family, a community, a sense of security. And those things, the possibility of those things is being mitigated, if not altogether eliminated for some people, which I think is a sort of more up-to-date reading of the idea of the fertility issue in the movie,
I think that's really well said. Another thing that I just thought of as you were talking was with the MAGA thing, it helped explain a little bit to me the obsession with Michelle Obama, right? How they're constantly like, before Joe dropped out, they're like, yeah, they're going to switch him out and Michelle is going to run.
Yeah.
And to me, I was like, what is this? Michelle Obama's not in politics. She's never said she wanted to be president. Like, and right. To me, it's like, no, they're unable to, like, that's what happened with Bill and Hillary. So they're just like, that same thing must happen with Barack and Michelle, right? It's like this weird inability to imagine something other than what has come before, that it fits into this like structure of repetition. The idea of like a new, a new like direction for what the left might do is unthinkable in a weird way. Awesome. Well, I think that was a really interesting conversation. Next week, we're going to be looking at a new film, one that just came out on the Criterion Channel, namely The Beast. Which is adapted by Bertrand Bonello, based loosely on a Henry James story, The Beast in the Jungle. And I've already watched it. and it's very interesting. It's very much in keeping with the sort of AI tuned episodes that we've done in the past,
Oh, great.
but also has a kind of apocalyptic subtext as well. So
Perfect.
I think it'll fit nicely into our canon of AI apocalypse episodes. Once again, if you like the show, please share it with a friend, write us a review, follow us. Follow us on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, End of the World WMS. And until next week, this has been the End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu, and we'll talk to you real soon.